2010, Marjorie Dannenfelser first came to Capitol Hill, before she became the most politically relevant voice of the anti-abortion lobby, before she extracted from the host of The Apprentice a promise to appoint anti-abortion judges, and before those judges tilted the court decisively against a constitutionally protected right to an abortion. She was a young assistant to West Virginia Democrat Alan Mollahan. While out for a sandwich, Alan Mollahan had once been handed a flyer depicting an aborted fetus, a moment he recalled as having pressed upon him the certain undeniable horror. In 1989, he was head of the pro-life caucus in the House. "He was good to me," Dannenfelser told me, "like a father. He cared about me." He let her ignore her boring responsibilities to focus on the issue about which she had become passionate. It was from Mollahan that Dannenfelser learned what she considers one of the most important lessons in politics: there can be no hesitation in the exercise of political power. "If you shoot a bear," he told her, "you have to kill it." 2 decades later, in 2010, Dannenfelser was the head of the Susan B. Anthony List, the group that works exclusively to elect anti-abortion legislators. That was the year Mollahan, now a 14-term congressman with impeccable anti-abortion credentials, voted in a way that she considered objectionable. He believed Obamacare effectively excluded federally funded abortions. She did not feel Obama's executive order to this effect was reliable. After he voted for the bill, she directed her PAC to spend $78,000 against Mollahan, running radio ads that said, "Alan Mollahan betrayed us and voted to spend our federal dollars on abortions." Though this was at best unclear, the congressman lost his 14th bid for re-election. "If you shoot a bear, you have to kill it." This is a story Dannenfelser does not hesitate to tell. She also enjoys being called the Velvet Hammer. Her 2020 book is called Life is Winning, but it is less about the winningness of life than about the losingness of various people who failed to align themselves with her mission. The list of those alive and dead with whom Dannenfelser is utterly exasperated includes John McCain, George W. Bush, and Ronald Reagan. All of them, she says, had been given on a national stage many opportunities to authentically witness to the depravity and extremism of abortion and had failed to do so. Bob Dole neglected to get sufficiently excited about banning an abortion procedure called intact dilation and extraction. What a shame it was that after leaving one of his most potent issues on the sidelines, he lost in a landslide. There is the muddled thinking and incomprehensible musing of Justice Anthony Kennedy, the failure of Newt Gingrich to even name-check abortion in his contract for America, and Sarah Palin, who arrived with great hope but left with great disappointment after failing to show up for a conference called Dannenfelser had organized. Dannenfelser is disappointed in Senator Ted Cruz, former Governor John Kasich, former Governor Scott Walker, and former Congressman Barb Stupik, to whom she promised an anti-abortion award and then dramatically rescinded the offer. There is the grief she professes to feel at having to campaign against more than a dozen stalwart anti-abortion legislators who voted for the Affordable Care Act, including one who sued her for lying about him in his district. There is the supremely exasperating Mitt Romney, who had a natural aversion to the abortion issue but appeared to have captured the heart of conservative columnist Jennifer Rubin, whose overwrought defenses of Romney resembled those of a lovesick schoolgirl. Dannenfelser has pretty much had it with Renee Velez, to whom SBA List gave $17,000 but who subsequently threw tantrums over a bill requiring victims of rape to report that rape to authorities to obtain an abortion after 20 weeks. This is the exasperation of a practiced biter of bullets, a woman focused on the mission at the cost of possibly everything else, one conscious of trade-offs. which she calls a hierarchy of goods and evils, and uncommonly direct about political transaction. There's a cleanliness to her thinkin', the rare resistance to derailment. Donald Trump gave her movement 3 Supreme Court justices. When asked whether his attitude toward abortion politics was purely transactional, she once replied, "If it were only that, that would be fine." One senses, under this capable woman's litany of small disappointments, a history of condescension in the halls of Congress, where the consultant class advised Republicans against addressing abortion at all. Partly, she told me, because of their own temperament, but also because of the apparatus connected to consultants, federal cash to give the same stupid advice over and over again. Dannenfelser and her allies, she says, were treated as if we were a remote and mysterious species to be bought off with shiny beads and baubles. But now it is 2022, 6 triumphant years after her supporters lifted up the most anti-abortion president in history. Roe is all but dead, and the power of a certain dark rhetoric increasingly evident on all sides. She is no longer remote, and Dannenfelser's office is on the top floor of a glass-rimmed ovoid high-rise in Arlington, Virginia, beside a highway and overlooking the silos, barrels, and steel of a working concrete plant. One day in March, Dannenfelser wore pearls and green satin, and on her couch we talked about all the people she had punished for failing to live up to her ideals. At the very end, I mentioned that I live in Los Angeles. The last time she had been to Los Angeles, she said, she went to see a small exhibit at the California Science Center called Life Beginnings. A mom and her young son were there, inside the kind of skeletal wooden tube, looking at preserved human embryos and fetuses in chronological succession. There was a video, an authoritative woman's voice narrating. "That's what you looked like," the mother said to the little boy as a bulbous pink mass barreled across the screen. "The first few weeks are a vulnerable time for the embryo, and some do not survive," said the narrator. "Why don't they make it?" the boy asked his mother. "Some just aren't healthy," she said. The interview was over. Marjorie was sitting on the couch in her office, remembering the guileless little boy struggling to grasp the idea of the embryos that hadn't made it through. Her eyes were wet with tears. When you imagine a fetus, it is possible you see the 1965 cover of Life magazine, on which appeared Leonard Nelson's photograph of one, ethereal, clean, floating in space like a sleek, hairless little cosmonaut. Nelson's photos of fetuses at various stages were collected in the massively best-selling A Child is Born, where they were taken for scientific artifacts and placed in a narrative sequence framed as a miracle. These images and others like them came to be known in feminist literature as the public fetus, the singular locus of public concern, sentimentality, and rage. If we are by now accustomed to discussing ulterior motives and the well-documented history of legislators using abortion rhetoric to consolidate the right, we speak less of how the rhetoric works, by triggering in its subjects a stomach-churning horror. Millions of Americans believe that their fellow citizens tolerate and participate in the ongoing mass extermination of human children. They go to sleep, as I did as a child, assuming that the next day will involve thousands of babies murdered in a medical setting, whereupon cynical adults will call these murders choices. It is a horror not only in its violence but in the way it frames social reality, the world of self-justificatory liars slaughtering the innocent, architects of a darkness on par with the Holocaust or slavery. The family given to this worldview is focused on the grisly death of a child against the harrowing idea of a woman's right, the repetition of which becomes itself part of the nightmare. Every other call to humanity then becomes the kind of hypocrisy. How can you claim to care about some narrow issue of social justice when you condone this unspeakable violence? It is a darkness the democratic process is not particularly equipped to handle, in that it breaks the terms of negotiation. If you come to believe you live in a state that sanctions the routine murder of children, nearly anything can be justified in their defense. Abortion is murder, reads the old tagline for the radical activist group Operation Rescue. Act like it. This directive is illuminating in that, for a long time, even anti-abortion groups did not act like it. They hadn't yet captured the party. Right up until Dannenfelser's early adulthood, reproductive rights lacked obvious partisan valence. The Nixon appointee wrote the majority opinion for Roe v. Wade. 2 other Nixon appointees voted for it. The top 2 Republican candidates in 1964 supported liberalizing abortion laws. 3 years later, the Republican governor in Colorado signed the first state law liberalizing abortion, and 2 years after that, the national poll showed Republicans were more likely to support first-term abortions than were Democrats. Dannenfelser's parents are pro-choice Republicans. In this, they are typical of their time. All social movements work to erase context contrary to the cause. In this case, the context is women. This era, prior to one party's intense interest in the preservation of what it would insist on calling life, was also the last before the introduction of fetal ultrasound. Confirmation of pregnancy still relied heavily on a woman's report of her sensory experience. Menstruation, quickening, shifts in being that lamp-precise description but not hard reality. By the mid-70s, write Malcolm Nicholson and John E. Fleming, 2 historians of ultrasound, the pregnant woman was no longer the chief arbiter of the condition of her fetus, at any stage in pregnancy. Her testimony regarding her menstrual dates was no longer crucial in estimating fetal age, her experience of quickening no longer the significant marker of fetal life. The uterus had become a space more easily measured and monitored, less a personal mystery than a space other people felt they knew well. What we see remains complicated. How did the unborn turn into a billboard image, asks historian Barbara Duden in her tract on the public fetus, and how did that isolated goblin get into the limelight? Take that cover of Life, Nelson's tethered cosmonaut. An 18-week-old fetus does not, in any conceivable circumstance, appear outside its mother clean and pink and ethereally backlit. Nowhere in A Child is Born, still a text used in universities as well as a staple of anti-abortion literature, is it revealed that Nelson's photos were of aborted fetuses, dead or dying, gray and blood-specked, arranged, then lit and colored the ruddy hues of a human baby. Another way to describe this picture, a person in her 18th week of pregnancy, absent almost all of her body. The living fetus is constitutive of a system, tucked inside a ligament-suspended uterus, nestled behind apron-like folds of viscera themselves thick with nerves and vessels and nodes, itself draped behind muscle, a single moving object among the shifting array of blood-filled organs that will slide to make room as the body changes. This is not the discontinuous succession of the life exhibit but a unity in flux. Almost all social movements work to erase context contrary to the cause. In this case, the context is a woman.